So Niels, thank you so much for joining me. First of all, how did you get into the wine trade, and where did it all start?
I think it was sort of subliminal, maybe more than anything else. I was fortunate enough to grow up in the old part of the area is called Takai, but it's sort of, people might know Constantia better. And so the house my parents bought was the third house to be built amongst all these vineyards. So I grew up, running around vineyards, stealing grapes during harvest time and trying to make some dodgy wine on the side. And my grandparents also lived in Franschhoek. So subliminally, there was a lot of time spent, running around in vineyards and school holidays, and as I say, trying to make dodgy buckets full of wine, I suppose, from stolen grapes. And I suppose it was just there in the back of my head. And I always wanted to study something sort of farming or something outdoorsy. And my mom at the time, she was doing one of these WSET courses, the sort of local equivalent. And she said, well, why don't you do winemaking? So I thought, well, that sounds like a fantastic idea. And and the more I got into it, the more I loved it. And, I still obviously to this day love it. And I hope I never lose the flair of wanting to make wine every year and that excitement of making wine.
So where did you study? Where did you end up studying?
So I studied at Elsenburg Agricultural College, just outside Stellenbosch. And, at the time they were only training up 10 winemakers. So it was quite a thing to get in. They basically picked the 10 top viticultural students and said, right, do you want to do the winemaking course? And if one of those 10 said no, they took number 11 type thing. So it was very hands-on, which was really exciting. And I must say, I've sort of, now that I've been making wine for close on probably 32 years, I sort of feel maybe, I should have, instead of studying, just go and work vintages. My daughter Alice is, she's not trained, but she's just working vintages all over the show, and it helps. There's things you can't learn out of a book. You've got to physically make wine, and sometimes you say, well, you study for 4 years. If you did 8 vintages in those 4 years, you'd probably come out a better bet than somebody coming out of university going, hey, I'm a winemaker, and you actually know FA. So that's.
But how was it for a boy from the southern suburbs venturing into Stellenbosch to agricultural college? Did you ever get teased a little bit?
No, not really. I mean, I suppose there's a language barrier, but I've been very fortunate that I was pretty fluent in Afrikaans. In the bad old days, we all had to do military service, so we were all pretty used to speaking Afrikaans. So you fit in very quickly. And when you're playing sport and you're playing rugby, it's it's a pleasure.
Sport is the common language in that sense.
And there are very few idiots are going to pick a fight with somebody who's playing first team rugby at the college. So
exactly. And so talking of vintages, Alice is obviously, I think she's just been in the UK doing a vintage here, which is fantastic. Right. Where was your favorite vintage whilst learning, bringing?
It's quite interesting. I mean, I probably enjoyed Chile, unbelievably so, because it was at the time I was there, it was still, I wouldn't say dark ages is probably a horrible thing, but they were still making wine very, very traditionally, didn't have all the updated gear at that time. It was all about grape quality, and I really enjoyed working in Chile. But probably the vintage where I learned the most was probably Australia, and sometimes also learned what maybe I shouldn't be doing, but I don't want to annoy anybody.
So talking of grape varieties, which you mentioned on there, how did you decide that the grape varieties that you're currently working with, and maybe give everyone a bit of a background as to what they are, and did you always want to work with those varieties?
Yeah, it's quite weird. I mean, I'm probably not like most. I wasn't like most teenagers. I didn't really drink beer. I drank a horrible concoction which used to be called Cane and Coke, or Spook and Diesel as they used to call it in South Africa. And I drank that until I was about 16, 17, but I drank red wine. Instead of going through the process of white wine and then getting onto red wine, I drank Shiraz, and I drank those old Hartenbergs and Zandvliets of the time. And I just loved Shiraz. So that was the sort of thinking. And then when I went to Australia, I obviously had a chance to work quite extensively with quite a lot of Chenin, funnily enough, making what do they call it? The Horton White Burgundy, which I'm sure is a travesty of terms, if ever. But there was a lot of Chenin in that blend, so I worked a lot with that, with Chenin. And then, when I was working with the Shiraz, I thought, I'd really enjoy Shiraz. I loved the Australian Shirazes when I was there. And I just thought, I'm going to give this a punt when we get back. So when I got back to South Africa, only 0.8% of total plantings in 1995 were actually planted to Shiraz. It was almost a novelty grape. And now it's 13.8. So it's really, a lot of people have taken a lot of favor to it. But it was something new, and nobody had planted Shiraz from Solari's Pass all the way to Cape Agulhas. So it was a new boundary almost to go into. And so we planted with Royal Beaumont. I planted in 1996. We planted the first Shiraz in this area, and on the success of how that was doing, we then, when we finally bought our own piece of land, it was a no-brainer. We were going to definitely put Shiraz in. And Chenin, I've worked with a lot of Chenin. I worked with a lot of Chenin when I was at Beaumont, and I love the grape. It's a fantastically versatile grape. It can do so many different styles, but it's obviously a very important grape for South Africa, and it's really nice to be making. I think in general the Chenins coming out of South Africa are quite spectacular, and they just keep improving. So it's lovely to work with that grape. So yeah, Shiraz blend, Chenin blend. Those are the 4 wines we do.
And how did you end up on the farm where you are now? Obviously, worked for a bit for Beaumont, and then how did you find the plot? Did you plant the whole lot yourself, or was it already planted to some vines when you?
No, I'm the first idiot in my family to go farming, so it was a bare piece of land, and it was. I was looking at land all over the show. I started at Beaumont. I said I want to ultimately own my own spot. Obviously, money was an issue, but you make things work. And I'd looked at properties, all over the region, and one very rainy, long weekend where we were all getting cabin fever. I had to get out of the house before I'd kill one of my kids. I walked up the hill because it's a neighboring farm to Beaumont, and sat on the little koppie here and had a look at the view, and I thought, shit, this could really work. It's quite something. And we set about getting a digger, a back actor in, and we took soil samples and made sure that the soils were suitable for vines. And the analysis came back, was fantastic. And then set about finding some money to buy the land off my neighbor on the other side. And so it took quite a while to convince the Department of Agriculture to subdivide only 17 hectares, which is the size of the farm. I think the laws at the time were you had to be 30 hectares. And it was, we had to motivate that we could actually make a living. Probably a lot of hocus pocus, but I sort of mentioned Le Pen and Petrus, and they're only about 5 hectares or 4 hectares, and they're doing all right. So I thought maybe that would convince them to subdivide a small piece.
How would you typify the Bot River region? And well, maybe for you, where on the world stage does South Africa sit, and then how does Bot River then fit into supporting South Africa in the international market?
Yeah, I think South Africa, because of our history, we still, in real terms, maybe the real wine industry in South Africa is probably only where we're 30 years old, maybe. My maths is failing me at the moment, but let's go 26 years old, let's say, from the time that the sanctions got lifted and we got on with it. So there's been unbelievable growth, and we're still pushing boundaries and probably still trying to find our feet to find out what works where. And but it's happening very quickly, and there's a lovely wave of young winemakers that are very ballsy, and they're going for it, which is fantastic. And I think from that point of view, South Africa has got a huge role to play in the world of wine. I think across the board we over-deliver quality price points without a doubt, and I think the quality just keeps rising every year. So that is exciting on the world front. When it comes to Bot River, we always say we're the sort of small family area. We always we're sort of having to rub shoulders with Hemel and Ardagh on one side and Elgin on the other side. and maybe we're the poor cousins in the middle, but we make enough noise to outshout the two of the neighbors. And it's all family owned. And yeah, I think it's a lovely little, it's not really it's a ward more than an appellation. It's really a small valley, and we've sort of over time we've worked out what works here and what doesn't work. And I think there's been there was quite a lot of Sauvignon planted that's now been replaced by a lot more Chenin, and Pinotage seems to do quite nicely here as well, and Shiraz. Obviously, I think there's probably the biggest plantings are Shiraz, and we found that the one or two sort of microclimates that work for Sauvignon, they can be planted to Sauvignon and they work. But I think Bot River's calling card is and we've got a lovely term. It's real wine made by real people, and it's everybody here is genuine, and we're making great wine. It's the wines are made with integrity. There's not a lot of fiddling in the cellar, and quite hands-on. And again, family owned is a great thing to have, because people have a serious vested interest, obviously.
Yeah, it's nice for the legacy and the continuation of farms with the family notion. So I get, great sense of camaraderie. We're always saying that on a world stage, small regions, you're not competing with your next door neighbor. They're actually your best friends to promote the wine and the region themselves on the bigger picture.
Exactly. And we're very fortunate here from a weather-wise. I mean, we obviously still by world standards are not as cool. But we are only 8 kilometers from the sea. So we have this huge sort of influence, and there's always a wind blowing, which means that, generally the bugs stay out of the vineyards, and everything's quite healthy. It means we can farm pretty much green, and that really works beautifully for us.
Yeah. And so the style of wines that you're making, how have they evolved over the years from very first vintage? What year was your first vintage?
So, yeah, it's on the Luddite. The first vintage was 2000, but that was the Luddite Shiraz. That was bought in fruit, and we generally set out in the beginning just to make one wine. I think that comes from traveling, and you see people just focusing on one thing. I think one criticism of South Africa is there's too many wines and a lot of the ranges.
Fruit basket.
Yeah, and it just makes sense to just focus and get one thing right. And I suppose idle hands, next thing you sort of get offered a nice parcel of Chenin, you say, okay, cool, well, let's make some Chenin. And then there's always comes a time where there's going to be a batch of barrels that you're happy with, but it's not your wine style, and then the next wine comes along. So the first vintage was 2000 with 14 grapes. The first vintage that had some of our own grapes was 2004, and finally 100% our own fruit under the Luddite label was 2009. That was also the year that coincided with our first vintage in our own cellar, which, being a brand new cellar, allowed us to then go 100% natural fermentation, because there were no other yeasts in there, which was also a great step for us. And I think the first vintage of Saboteur Red, which has found a lot of favor and got a great following, that was 2009, and that was is quite a big showy wine. We've toned that down a bit over time, and the blend changes every year because every year is different. And I think stylistically we're probably going to go more Rhône, as much as I quite like the quirkiness of the Cabernet in there, because it makes it something different, and it really does add to the backbone of the wine. But the 2017 has got Grenache in for the first time, and we're going to get our first crop of Grenache off our own vineyards in 2021. And I'm hoping that's, we'll slowly maybe go a bit more Chateauneuf that way down the road. And I think the wines will still be, we pick on flavor, and we want those flavors in the grape. We can't expect them in the wine if they're not in the grape. So, generally the wines are on the bolder side when it comes to the red. And I would say we're probably going to keep down that route. If it ain't broke, don't fix it type thing.
Great. And the style of wine that you like drinking at home, does that echo what you're making in the winery as well? Or what would you tend to be drinking if you weren't drinking your own wine?
Yeah, it's sort of, I'm sometimes guilty of drinking the same stuff in a way. I tend to lean a lot towards the Rhône and a lot towards the Loire, which is obviously the two things we make. But it's I'm trying to force myself. In fact, this during lockdown we raided the cellar, and we just didn't.
Who didn't?
Yeah, well, everybody did, but we try to stay away from drinking, going to that same corner, just drinking different things.
Yeah.
And I think, like anybody that has an interest in wine, that wants to learn, you've got to keep broadening your palate all the time, otherwise you end up standing still. So I would love to drink more champagne if I could afford it. I do enjoy a tipple of bubbles, and that's certainly it. But I seem to be drinking lighter style wines in a way, and there is that trend. I think Grenache is probably playing a big role in that, and slightly fruitier, more early drinking wines, and even chilling them. In fact, I suppose in our climate that goes that way. But is it having an influence on the wines we make? I don't think so. But we certainly, I brought out a Grenache. I bottled a Grenache the other day or a year ago, and if there was a list of winemakers, I would have been bottom on that list to have made that wine. It was lighter than a Pinot, and it was just juicy and fruity. But there's no ways anybody would have put my name to it, and we loved it, and everybody enjoyed it. So we're going to carry on experimenting with those things. I think you've got to keep experimenting. You've got to keep pushing the envelope. I suppose we're all striving for the perfect wine, which doesn't exist. So it's an ongoing journey. It's great.
So obviously, apart from being South African rugby player, what would you be doing if you weren't making wine? It sounds it was pretty destined from the start, but was there anything you thought, or you ever thought, wish I dabbled at that or this?
I don't know. I love my sport. I suppose maybe at some stage when I was 16, I could hit a golf ball straight, and I was playing off two handicap at the time, and I thought, maybe we should give this professional golf a go, but I get bored sitting on a practice tee, and there's too much practice involved. I would, within 15 minutes, I'm trying to hit the guy that's collecting the balls, or I'm trying to see how far I can hook it or slice it or hit it through somebody's window or whatever. I just get bored, So that's maybe one of them. But I think maybe selling property on the Atlantic seaboard would have been quite profitable in Camps Bay and Clifton, something like that. No, I must say I really, I'm blessed to be doing something I really love, and so it's
well, I mean, talking about practicing. Sadly, you only get to practice making wine once a year, so there's no practicing; it's just doing.
Exactly. No, it's a lovely. I've used the analogy a lot of times. I've always said if you said to Cristiano Ronaldo, you've only got 40 chances in your life to make a name for yourself, he would never accept that. And as a winemaker, if you start making wine at the age of 25 and you retire at 65, you got 40 innings, you got 40 chances to go and make your name as Donald Bradman or whatever. That's pretty scary, mind you. He probably did it in 40 innings.
Yeah, well, exactly. No, cricket. I mean, I hate playing cricket. You get out, you think I've got to redeem myself somehow, and I've got to wait until my next innings. And I guess it is exactly the same. You feel so depressed that it's over, and there's no way to redeem yourself. Yeah. Got to wait till the next year.
If you said to any of the great batsmen in the world, you have 40 innings to make a name, they would also say that doesn't sound like a good deal.
Might change the attitude of some people's batting style completely.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant.
But there is no safety net, especially if you're in a small winery. There's you only have one tank of this and one tank of that. Those big wineries, you've got 40 tanks of something, and if you've got one that's sort of semi-dodgy, they probably blend it away in the other 39 tanks. Whereas, if it ain't good, you don't bottle it. Simple.
Brilliant. Niels, thank you so much for chatting, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
Lovely. Thank you very much.